All right, hello everybody. Today we're going to be covering over section 2.3 in your notes. So follow along with the video worksheet as we go through the slides. Alrighty. So 2.3 is all about carbon and carbon compounds in organic chemistry. So like we talked about before, anything that is considered living has carbon in it, and so it's considered something that is organic. Organic chemistry is basically the study of carbon, and that's basically all it is. So carbon is element number 6 on the periodic table. So it has 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 4 of those electrons are found at our energy level, which means it can make 4 covalent bonds very easily. So it loves to make 4 covalent bonds, which allows it to make chains and rings. So anytime we have carbon, we can have it in a straight chain. So what that means is carbon looks like this. Let's make that a little thinner so you can see it a little easier. So we can have carbon with a double bond all the way through. We could also have carbon as a ring. So carbon loves to make branches as well. We call these benzene rings. And the little lines in between are showing bonds between them. And we can have carbon that branches out. So we can have a carbon in the middle, has 4 lines going off it for its 4 bonds. We can have a carbon here, a carbon there, all the way around. And it has its bonds coming out. And it's just continuing on and on and on and on and on. All the way around to different carbon molecules. So carbon loves to make bonds, and always makes 4 bonds very easily. When we talk about carbon, we also talk about the difference between a macromolecule. So a macromolecule is a large polymer that are formed by adding smaller ones together. So we can have micromolecules or macro. Macro are the largest. We often then can make polymers. Polymers are compounds consisting of a repeating unit of lengths. So for example, we have a polymer here, so CH2, and we're just going to repeat that CH2 all the way through. So you see we have a C and 2 hydrogens, carbon, 2 hydrogens, all the way through, creating this nice little link. And we call that prefix poly, means many. So we have many links together. Monomer is when one unit of a polymer. So basically it's one small section of a polymer. And again, the prefix mono means one, so we're just looking at one small section of that polymer. And again, those macromolecules build these giant links, these polymers together, and create huge macromolecules, very, very large molecules over time. Okay, so 4 organic compounds essential for all living things. You will need to know these 4. So the first one are carbohydrates. Then we have lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. So all of those are shown here. So carbohydrates, so that's be your number 1. Lipids, which are considered our fats, which would be number 2. Nucleic acids would be part of our DNA and RNA. And 4 would be our proteins. So we'll talk about each one of these as we go. So the first one we're going to talk about are carbohydrates. So carbohydrates consist of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a 1 to 1 ratio. Meaning for every 1 carbon, there's 2 hydrogens and back to 1 oxygen. So for example, we have C6H12O6, and that is known as sugar. So anytime, or glucose. So anytime we talk about C6H12O6, we're talking about glucose. Living things use carbohydrates as our main source of energy. So that's why when we need energy, a lot of times we need to bring in some sort of sugar or carb or something to give us energy. So we have 3 types. we have a monosaccharide, a disaccharide, and a polysaccharide. And we're going to talk about each one's here. So the first one is a monosaccharide. So that's meaning one sugar or a simple sugar. Again, that prefix mono just means one. So one sugar. So we have three types, which are glucose, galactose, and fructose. They all follow the C6H12O6 molecule. They use the same formula, but they're just arranged a little bit differently. So we call those an isomer. So an isomer are compounds with identical molecular formulas but different structural formulas, meaning they all have C6, 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens, but they're all going to be shaped a little bit differently. So we have glucose. You probably have heard that before. Is manufactured by plants during photosynthesis. It's a simple sugar, are the main source of energy by plants and animals. So we take in a lot of glucose, our body breaks it down, and we then can take that into our cells to then be able to use it for energy to break down other compounds and allow our bodies to move like they're supposed to. And again, that comes from plants and animals. Then we have fructose. Fructose is found in fruit. So it's fruit and it's the sweetest of the monosaccharides. So anytime you eat any sort of fruit, that sweetness is coming from that fructose. And then we have galactose. Galactose is found in milk. So a lot of times when you hear somebody is lactose intolerant, that tose at the end is saying it's dealing with milk. Galactose is telling you it's the sugar. So the sugar in milk. Okay. So that would be part of monosaccharides. Then we get to disaccharides. Disaccharides are 2 monosaccharides. And we know that prefix di means 2. Saccharides are sugars. So we have 2 monosaccharides combined in a condensation reaction. So there are 3 types of those. So sucrose, lactose, and maltose. So sucrose is a sugar, it's like sugar cane or sugar beets. So that would be our glucose plus our fructose. So any type of our granulated sugar that we eat, that is going to be that sucrose that we deal with. Lactose is milk, which is glucose and galactose. So if you hear somebody is lactose intolerant, it means their body is unable to break down lactose, which is that disaccharide. And it's generally because of that galactose that is found in milk. So their body just can't break it down at the rate of which it is being consumed into the body. And so it makes the body feel upset and will give stomach aches and mess up digestion and things like that. So then people aren't able to eat large quantities of milk or dairy products. Polysaccharides are complex sugars. Again, that prefix poly means many or more than 3. Saccharides are sugars. So they're composed of 3 or more monosaccharides. So those are things like glycogen, animal starch, and cellulose. So things like cornmeal and cornstarch, anything that has a ton of basically starch. Potatoes have a lot of starch in them. They're going to fall under this polysaccharide. Very complex carbohydrates, have a lot of stored sugar inside of them that are then able to ingest, and we are able to break down for our bodies to then use. So make sure you know the difference between a monosaccharide, if it's going to let me, a monosaccharide, a disaccharide, and a polysaccharide. Monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, galactose, just a simple sugar, just one sugar. Disaccharide are 2 or more 2 monosaccharides combined together. And then we have a polysaccharide, which are complex carbohydrates, 3 or more monosaccharides stuck together. So that's all of our carbohydrates. Our next part are lipids. So lipids can be used to store energy. So a lot of times lipids we consider are fats. So fats are great at storing energy for our bodies to then use at a later date. So some lipids are important parts of membranes and waterproofing coverings. So for example, this picture up here, this is a phospholipid bilayer that we have within our cells. The part here, this is what we know as hydrophilic, mean water loving, means it loves to have water next to it. We have the inside here, which is hydrophobic, meaning it fears water or does not like water and will repel water. So this is great for waterproofing. So the water will allow it to come in and out of the cell because of the hydrophilic section or little balls on the outside, but our hydrophilic tails on the inside keep it from staying inside for long periods of time. It allows it to move in and out. Lipids are fatty compounds made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and a much higher number of carbon and hydrogen and less oxygen. So for example, any type of fat, oil, wax are considered lipids. They're also considered insoluble, meaning they do not dissolve in water, so they are hydrophobic. So a lot of times, if you ever hear the saying, oh, those two people are like oil and water. Oil is going to sit on top of the surface of the water and not mix in. That's because it's insoluble in water. It does not like to dissolve or break down. You oftentimes have to add things like dish soap to be able to break off oil and grease, which is because of those lipids. They store energy efficiently, so they love to store energy inside of lipids that our body then can use and break down at a later date or time when we feel like we need it, since we don't need to break down all the energy we consume all at once. So fats are actually good for you to have, all in moderation. Now, there are two types of fats. We have saturated lipids and polyunsaturated. So a saturated lipids are fats which are solid at room temperature, and those generally will come from animals. So that's what these guys here. So things like the fat on steak, butter, and cheese, those are going to be your saturated fats. Then we have polyunsaturated. You can also hear them called unsaturated fats. Those are your oils, so they're going to be liquid at room temperature, and they generally going to come from plants or fish. So we have vegetable oil, we have olive oil. Margarine is a oil-based butter, so it does not contain actual milk or actual butter. Then we have avocado oil, fish oil is a really popular one, almond and cashew oil, or any type of peanut oil. So if it is solid at room temperature, so lard, fat off a steak, things like that, that's going to be a saturated fat. If it is found in liquid at room temperature, you are going to be dealing with your polyunsaturated. So things like vegetable oil, olive oil, fish oil, almond oil, all those kinds of things. Generally, they say saturated fats are not as good for you, but any type of fat works. They say generally stick to those unsaturated fats are the little bit healthier choice for human consumption. Okay, so that was number 2. So 2 would be lipids. 3 are nucleic acids. So those will store and transmit hereditary information. So that would be our DNA and our RNA. So we have something called a nucleotide, and we'll talk about those a lot when we get into our RNA and DNA unit. That's where thousands of monomer chains combine together to make up DNA and RNA. So these little tiny sections here, that is part of a nucleotide. And those nucleotides tell you who you are and why you are the way you are. So complex organic molecules that store important information for the cell. And we have 2 types. We have DNA, which is deoxyribose nucleic acid. That's going to hold your genetic information. Tell you who you are, what you're allergic to, genetic variations that you have, what color eyes you have, what color hair you're going to have, how tall you're going to be, all comes from your DNA. Your RNA, which is your ribosomal or ribonucleic acid, stores and transmits information into making proteins. So the RNA is single-stranded, unlike the DNA, and it has copies of half of our DNA, pretty much, for the most part. It has a different nucleotide inside of it, and it's going to tell you basically what kind of proteins your body makes and at what rate do we need to start making those proteins that our body needs. So whether it's something, a amino acid or a protein, that's going to come from your RNA. Your DNA is in every single cell you have, and that's going to tell you who you are, how your body works, and all about you. And our last and final part is proteins. Proteins control the rate of a reaction and regulate cell processes. They transport substances in and out of the cell and help fight diseases. So proteins are super helpful in our body, other than trying to build muscle and things like that. They allow and move things throughout the body and help us fight off those diseases that make us sick. It's composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So everything else we've talked about so far has only been carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So proteins are special with that nitrogen. They form long chains called amino acids. So if you ever hear like an amino acid chain, there are 20 different types of amino acids that can be made through these proteins. They're important to cells of plants and animals. Again, they give us a lot of structure, help us fight off diseases and move things in and out of the cells and around the body. We have a dipeptide, which is 2 amino acids bonded together. And then we also have a polypeptide, which are 2 or more peptides chained together to make an make these amino acid chains. So RNA is really good at making these and helping us create these polypeptides that our body needs for different functions in the body, whether it is to help us fight diseases or to help move things around the cell, or just to regulate the system in general. Proteins are super helpful. That's why we have to eat proteins like chicken and beef, eggs, peanuts, anything that has any sort of rich protein base to it is super important for us to be able to carry on our lives. So main things to take away from today. First part is carbon. Carbon is part of organic chemistry. Again, anything considered with carbon is organic. It has 4 electrons in the outer shell, meaning it can make 4 covalent bonds. It loves to make many different types of bonds, so it can do a straight chain, a ring structure, and a branch structure. We also then can create macromolecules with those carbon atoms, and that's a macromolecule is just a link of polymers or monomers stuck together. We then talk about the 4 organic compounds essential for all living things. This you will have to know. Super, super, super important. It'll definitely be on your quiz this week. So we have carbohydrates, which are our sugars and simple sugars. We have 3 types. We have monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Monosaccharides are your simple sugars, glucose, fructose, and galactose. We have disaccharides, which are 2 of your monosaccharides stuck together. So sucrose and lactose and maltose. And then we get to polysaccharides, which are the more complex sugars or carbohydrates. They have 3 monomers stuck together. So glycogen, animal starch, starch, and cellulose. The next one would be lipids. Lipids are basically where fat is stored or energy is stored in fat. It is insoluble in water, meaning it does not dissolve because it is hydrophobic. Hydrophobic means it is water, or hydrophobic means water-fearing. Hydrophilic means water-loving. We have 2 types of lipids. We have saturated lipids and polyunsaturated lipids, also known as unsaturated lipids. So saturated lipids are fats that are found solid at room temperature and come from animals. And then our polyunsaturated are oils that come from plants or fish. Then we get into our third, which would be nucleic acids. So those are your DNA and RNA. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, and it gives you all your genetic information about who you are and how you work. RNA is ribonucleic acid, and it's basically there to help us create proteins for energy that our body needs. And the very last one are proteins. They help regulate cell processes. They transport substances in and out of the cells, and they also help fight diseases. They're also the only of the organic compounds that we talked about that have nitrogen involved. Other than that, everybody else has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We have something called a dipeptide and a polypeptide. So a dipeptide is 2 amino acids bonded together. And then we have a polypeptide, which are just longer chains of those amino acids all stuck together that we created through that RNA sequence. And that's all I got for today. So make sure you're filling out your notes as you go. Your homework for tonight is Form 2.3. That'll be due tomorrow when you walk in. We'll also check your... Oops, sorry, wrong one. Should be 2.4 is due tomorrow. Your 2.3 was due today when you walked in. We'll check that tomorrow as well to get you ready for your test on Friday. You can also start working on your chapter review if you already have both of those done. Shoot me an email if you have any questions, and have a great rest of your day.